Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Nate sat at the shabby desk in his apartment and felt his heart beating in his throat. He wanted to pour himself a glass of water, watch some light comedy to distract himself, but suddenly his eyes fell on the blinking email notification on his laptop. Just an ordinary evening, ordinary problems, nothing special, until the moment he decided to hit the Get Mail button. The message came from his boss's corporate address. The header contained just one word: urgent. Nate's first thought was, is this some unscheduled task again? But something clenched inside. He couldn't shake the feeling that the letter was strange. No greeting, no explanation, just an attached file with an obscure name, a set of letters and numbers. Nate caught his hand shaking as he moved the mouse cursor over the attachment. Pure paranoia, he reassured himself. His boss, Vic, must have come up with some project again and sent the wrong presentation by mistake. But an inner voice kept saying, careful. This doesn't look like a normal corporate newsletter. Still, he clicked on the attachment and waited for the clip to load. A dark picture appeared at the beginning, followed a few seconds later by sound. Quiet sobs, or maybe moans. Sounds clearly of an intimate nature. Another second, the screen lit up with indistinct silhouettes. Nate saw a female figure leaning over someone. He recoiled, feeling his heart skip a beat. In the video was his wife, Lauren, stripped naked, pressed against a man's body. She was either laughing or moaning, and her hand was sliding down another man's neck. Her face was clearly visible, there could be no doubt. Her luxurious, dark hair, the curve of her hips, her distinctive voice, all instantly recognizable. And next to her, in the frame, partially covering her face, a man appeared. And that man was Nate's boss, Vic. At that moment, Nate felt something break in his chest. His throat constricted. He realized he was literally short of breath. Why had Vic sent him this? Was it a mistake or a cruel taunt? Is he mocking me? Want to show that I'm just a fool who didn't see the obvious? Flashed through his mind. He didn't watch the video to the end. Already the first few seconds were clear and painful enough. Grabbing the cup, he set it down on the table with force, splashing water on the tablecloth. Calm down, Nate told himself, though he realized calm was out of the question. His head throbbed with thoughts. Maybe Vic did this on purpose to humiliate me? Or did the video get away by mistake? But then why is it signed urgent? An inner voice whispered, you've been betrayed. Both your wife and your boss. They were both laughing behind your back. Usually people, when faced with something like this, either immediately grab the phone, scream into the receiver, or cry silently. But it was as if Nate had awakened a forbidden, primal rage. Yet outwardly he remained calm, as if ice cold. It was strange to him, too. He felt something click inside him, shifting him from shock to cold determination. I need revenge, he thought, and suddenly everything inside fell into place. There were no more doubts left. He didn't want any conversation with Lauren. He wasn't going to listen to excuses. He didn't want to make the classic, how could you? Scene. No, that would be too petty. What his soul really craved was to return the blow many times over. Looking at the screen again, he bit his lip for a second. Another moan, a woman's laughter, a whisper, came from the speakers. I don't want to listen to this anymore, Nate thought. He closed the video, saved the file somewhere far away, let it lie as evidence. Afterward, he sat down at his laptop and began to think. Gathering the elusive sobriety of his mind into a fist, he absorbed the realization. I'm going to make them both regret this for the rest of their lives. And in that moment, he felt a marvelous clarity, as if all the chess moves had opened up before him at once, and he knew how the game would end. Let them know they're not messing with a wimp, but with a man who can hit the mark, Nate said to himself. His lips trembled slightly, changing to a cold smile, and in that expression, there was a sinister determination that he had never noticed in himself before. Before the story ran to that fateful video, Nate and Lauren's life had seemed quite happy, at least superficially. They'd been married for a few years. They married relatively young. Lauren had a knack for glamorizing and suggesting that a man could do anything with her by his side. Nate had fallen for her without a second thought, overwhelmed by her charisma and charm. Nate first built his career at a small local firm that sold and serviced computer equipment. He wasn't a superstar, but he had tenacity, a good mind, and gradually rose through the ranks. Lauren, sensing his potential, kept saying, "You need to push yourself. You need to go to the next level. We deserve more." At first, her words gave him confidence. Then one day, she brought the news that a large company where a distant acquaintance of hers worked was looking for a competent employee in the IT department. "This is your big chance, Nate," Lauren said, literally beaming with inspiration, and he agreed to give it a try. The company was called Solaris Technology. Gorgeous office, huge prospects. The first interview was conducted by HR, then he was immediately called for a second interview. This time the boss himself, Vic, came to talk to him. Young, goal-oriented, charming, Vic impressed Nate at the first meeting as a charismatic and intelligent manager. They seemed to hit it off quickly. Vic smiled, complimented, asked about Nate's career, and at the end of the meeting said, "You're a good fit for us. Welcome to the team." It was a real success for Nate. Instead of a small firm, a large corporation with branches all over the country, good salary, bonuses. The first months he flew to work on wings of enthusiasm and believed that everything was going great. Vic gave him lip service. "Nate, I have big plans for you," he repeated. Lauren, on the other hand, was excited, but at some point something changed in her demeanor. At first, it was small things. She started spending more time doing her own thing, as she said. She'd go to the store to buy some expensive dress, or she'd sign up for a fitness club at the latest session, or a friend would call her, and she'd storm out of the house. Nate, focused on career growth, wrote it off to her character. Lauren had always been active, liked to party, and spend time out of the house. Yes, sometimes he noticed that she spoke on the phone in a muffled voice, as if she were hiding something. But he didn't pay much attention. When Lauren started talking more and more about fitness and late returns, Nate had once joked, "Maybe you're training for a bikini contest." She only snickered. "You know figure is important. I want to look perfect." At that point, it never occurred to him to suspect her of anything more serious. But one day, there was a moment that made his heart twitch. He noticed Lauren talking on the phone with a poorly concealed smile. And when she heard Nate's footsteps, she quickly dropped the call and said, "Oh, that was a mistake. Some number dialed me," and immediately left to go into the other room. Nate didn't make a scene then. After all, they had a friendly relationship. Nothing outwardly indicated a grand lie. True, the thoughts that she might be cheating were unpleasant to him. He simply banished them. "Loves me, praises me, we've been together for years," he reassured himself. Soon Vic began to show even more affection for Nate. He would sometimes invite him to sit for coffee, right in his office, asking him about plans, talking about projects. "You could be heading up a new department soon. Trust me. I see your potential," the boss asserted. It all seemed flattering and reassuring. It was during this period that Lauren kept throwing around the phrase, "How's Vic doing? Is he helping you grow?" And for some reason, her interest sometimes seemed strange to Nate. But it quickly passed. "She cares about me, wants me to succeed." He couldn't imagine that their shared path to a brighter future was actually Lauren and Vic's cunning plan, or that Lauren herself was looking for an adventure on the side, and Vic, seeing an opportunity to use his subordinate's wife, had seized the chance. Either option would hurt, and Nate didn't want to believe it. But lo and behold, a few months into the job, everything became clear overnight thanks to that ill-fated email with the video. Lauren and Vic had clearly been together for days. Perhaps Vic had simply misdirected the email, intending to send the video to Lauren's personal email account, and instead auto-filled Nate's corporate address. Maybe Vic wanted to trample his ego by playing sadistic games. Whatever the case, the video highlighted a truth that could no longer be hidden from. The day before, Nate had thought of Vic as his mentor and Lauren as his favorite wife. Now he realized that the two people closest to him were just mocking him, enjoying the fact that he didn't suspect a thing. Nate, however, had never been one to give up. "Well," he said to himself, "they wanted to play with me? Well, let's play. Let's see who gets the last laugh." When he came back from his thoughts, Nate realized he was sitting in front of his laptop, staring at the screen, and it was already dark outside the window. He glanced at his watch. Time was running out. but he didn't feel tired. Adrenaline was driving him forward. His heart was beating unevenly, but his brain was working surprisingly well. The first thing he did was double-check the sent folder in his email. Could Vic have accidentally inserted Nate's address when sending that video to his wife? Most likely yes, an oversight, Nate thought. Only a madman would intentionally send something like that. Oh well, he grinned. That's their global mistake. He already knew what was coming next. The first thought that came to his mind was, I need publicity. Talking quietly won't solve anything. I don't want to give them a chance to quietly cover it up. If I retaliate, I want them never to recover. Such a plan required a partner and one who had access to the company's systems. Naturally, it could be an IT guy. In every large office, there is a person who knows how to display any video or presentation on a common screen, how to connect the network, how to customize the broadcast. And usually such an expert can be talked into it if you pick the right arguments. Nate wasn't on a first-name basis with all the IT guys in the company, but he remembered one guy, Phil, young, with perpetually disheveled hair and unremarkable appearance. Quiet and not very talkative, he was, however, a genius of networking stuff. Remembering their rare dialogues, Nate figured Phil's the guy who can set up anything in the office. And for money, he could turn a blind eye to the formalities and participate in the surprise. Not to waste any time, Nate moved out of the house right that evening. He expected, of course, that Lauren might show up asking, "Where are you? Why did you leave so late?" But he didn't care right now. She was the last person he wanted to talk to. He called Phil, introduced himself, said he had something urgent to discuss about the IT project. He was a little confused, but when he heard the determined tone in Nate's voice, he agreed to the meeting. Half an hour later, they were already sitting in a small coffee shop not far from the office. Nate asked for a blind booth and ordered their coffee. Phil came in, clearly nervous. "Nate, what's the emergency?" Nate spoke softly, looking straight into the guy's eyes. "Listen, here's the situation. I need something to be shown on the screens at the general meeting tomorrow during my boss's speech. But no one but you and me can know how it got there." Phil frowned. What exactly is it?" Nate picked up his phone and briefly showed a screenshot from the video, without sound. Phil's face stretched. Oh, I see. Vic is in the shot with my wife," Nate said, struggling to get the words out while trying not to give away how seething he was inside. "I need the whole company to see who this man is." Phil exhaled. "That's totally fucked up. Are you sure you want to show this in the office?" "I'm sure," Nate nodded coldly. "If you have concerns, I understand them. But I'll pay for the risk." He named an amount that was clearly more than Phil's monthly salary. The boy's lips trembled slightly. He wasn't a rich man, and he realized that such money was not excessive. Of course, there was still the reputational hazard, the risk of losing his job. But Nate went on. "You can name a bigger sum, I won't haggle. All I need is that at the general meeting, when Vic starts his speech, all the office monitors and the main screen in the conference room play this clip. Just a few seconds, just enough time for everyone to realize what was going on." Phil swallowed. "Aren't you afraid this is going to backfire on you, too?" "Let it." Nate shrugged. "I'm ready to take the fire. But the main goal is to humiliate Vic in front of everyone. And, as you realize, his wife will be there, too." Phil realized it was a bombshell, but the money Nate offered really solved a lot of problems. After a brief pause, he sighed. "Okay, I'll do it. But if anything, I'll take responsibility," Nate assured him. They discussed the technicalities in detail. Phil, though shocked, technically understood what needed to be done. "And yes," Nate added, "try to cover your tracks so no one realizes you did it." "I will." Thus, in one evening the plan was ready. Nate knew that there would be a general meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the large conference room, where Vic was going to speak about new corporate values and upcoming changes. Perfect timing for a high-profile coup. The only thing left to do was to get his nerves in order. Nate wasn't a bloodthirsty maniac who relished the pain of others, but resentment and cold anger burned in him. He wasn't about to give Vic or Lauren a chance to slip out from behind the scenes. Tomorrow, everything would be revealed in front of witnesses. He would turn his boss's accidental mistake into a crushing blow, and he would probably continue to find ways to finish off the traitors. He knew his job, His reputation was at stake. But that didn't matter now. The main thing was to restore his own dignity and show that I am not to be trifled with. Morning came. Nate arrived at the office early to take a seat somewhere in the back of the conference room, away from view. He knew that Vic always liked to make a spectacular appearance and was often the last one in so that everyone would notice his arrival. Colleagues were pulling up, greeting each other, whispering. Some of them were talking about the fact that Vic had promised something important. There was curiosity on people's faces. What is this reform or news? The hall itself was a large room with a wide screen on the wall and several plasma panels around the perimeter so that everyone could see the information, even if they were sitting on the side or in the back. Phil at this time was presumably already plugging his surprise into the broadcast system. About 15 to 10, Vic's wife Margot appeared. A statuesque, spectacular blonde in a business suit, she walked through the rows with a posture as if she were a model on the runway. She was accompanied by a couple of acquaintances from the management staff. After glancing around the room, she took a seat in the front row, kissed one of her friends on the cheek, and smiled. Nate knew she regularly attended important meetings, even though she didn't officially work for the company. Maybe Vic wanted her to feel like a queen next to his majesty. A few minutes before 10 o'clock, Vic entered the auditorium. At his appearance, most of the staff fell silent. Vic was in an expensive suit. He walked confidently to the podium. A slight whisper of respect and slight envy went through the hall. It's Vic himself, a top manager. No one suspected the shock that awaited them. Nate sat so as to remain inconspicuous in the middle of the room, covered by several people. He felt his heart begin to beat harder. Well, Phil, just so long as you don't flinch, he thought. Vic began to speak. His voice sounded cheerful and self-assured. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our regular meeting. Today I have some important news regarding our corporate policies and values. He talked about how the company strives for transparency, team unity, and a family atmosphere. At these words, Nate wanted to chuckle bitterly. Family atmosphere? Yeah, exactly. I guess I got the horns as part of the camaraderie. The plan was to have Phil start the video within a couple minutes of the speech starting. Vic continued his inspirational speech, mentioning progress, rising figures, something about new projects. Vic's wife, Margot, sat in the front row and nodded approvingly. Everything seemed to be going according to the usual scenario. But Nate was already clenching his fists, waiting for the moment. Suddenly, the images on several screens changed simultaneously. Instead of presentation slides, incomprehensible images began to appear. Vic noticed it with his side vision and hesitated for a split second, but hurriedly continued speaking, trying to keep his confidence. In just a couple of seconds, however, the screen filled with a clear image. Lauren leaning over Vic. Silence covered the hall. The air seemed to grow thick, and all the people seemed like statues. Lauren looked without a shadow of embarrassment in the video, her naked body clearly visible from this angle, and Vic's face, though slightly in shadow, was easy to recognize. And it took up the whole huge screen. Some people gasped, some covered their mouths with their hands, and some looked away, not believing their eyes. Vic turned to the screen and was horrified to see himself and his mistress in all their glory. His face turned as white as a sheet of paper. At that moment, Margot's hysterical scream sounded. What's that? She jumped up, pointing her hand to the screen, fury in her eyes. The video ran for just a few seconds, but it was enough to imprint in everyone's mind the image of the boss on horseback. The hall exploded with muted exclamations, shocked whispers. Vic rushed to the remote, yelling for someone to turn off the projector, trying to press something, but Phil had provided protection. It wasn't until the key scenes played out that the clip faded out on its own. The time that it managed to pass, however, was enough time for disaster. Everyone saw Vic's heated face, his and Lauren's embrace, and the all-too-obvious interplay of bodies. There was a pause of several seconds. Vic stood staring shocked at the technician, unsure of what he should do now. Colleagues looked away. Someone dropped a folder of papers. Someone bit his lip. Vic, came Margot's harsh voice. She looked around at the audience. as if looking at the witnesses of the tragedy, and then in a few steps, she covered the distance to the podium. "It's you. You." She couldn't formulate a thought. She was simultaneously furious and in a state of stupor. Vic tried to justify himself, throwing up his hands. "Margot, this is a mistake. It's a video montage," he muttered. But everyone could see that there was no doubt about the authenticity of the tape. Panic was written on Vic's face. He tried to make his voice firm, but he failed. You idiot," Margot yelled, unable to choose her words. She raised her hand and slapped him, which resounded throughout the room. Vic recoiled, losing his balance. The people in the hall gasped. No one dared to intervene. Too scandalous and personal a scene was playing out right in front of the entire office. "You bastard," Margot shrieked, turning around and spotting Lauren, who had also come to the meeting as the wife of a senior employee. She was sitting a little farther back, shocked, not expecting the video to come out right then and there. Margot literally flew across a couple rows, rushed over to Lauren, and grabbed her by the hair, yanking her off her chair. "Bitch, you broke my family," she shouted, waving her hand. Lauren, knocked to the ground, tried to fight back. Screams were heard. People were rushing around in confusion. Some, especially women, jumped up to break up the fights. Lauren was getting punched, and Margot seemed distraught. Vic was thrashing around, trying to calm his wife down, but she turned on him and slammed her fist into his chest again, like a panther defending its territory. "I will destroy you. I hate you both," she shrieked, her voice breaking with rage. The auditorium buzzed with amazement. Many of the staff took out their cell phones to film what was happening. Someone tried to reason with Margot, and several people helped lift Lauren off the floor. Nate watched from his seat, outwardly calm, but inside he was rattling fireworks of emotion. He watched the boss and his mistress wife destroy themselves publicly. His plan had succeeded. The exposure had been deafening. In the corridor, the stomping of the security guards who had been called by the staff could already be heard. But the flurry of emotion didn't subside for another 2 or 3 seconds. Lauren looked awful, her hair disheveled, her jacket torn, a scratch on her cheek. Vic stood back, catching his breath, realizing that his life was about to go downhill. After the security guards and a few managers separated the fighters, there was a monstrous tense pause. No one knew what to say, and Margot, breathing like a hunted animal, turned around and blurted out, "Divorce. Tomorrow. And you." She jabbed her finger at Lauren. "You whore. I'll see you both." The employees began to disperse. Some of them just strode towards the exit, realizing that there was hardly going to be any business meeting now. Vic stood there, frantically trying to find some explanation, but the words were stuck in his throat. Nate saw Lauren look over, and their eyes met for a split second. His wife's face reflected the horrified realization. "You set this whole thing up, didn't you?" But Nate only stared coldly, not giving away any feelings for a second. Let her guess, he thought. I don't care. The very punch Nate had planned had worked. He smiled under his breath, a wicked and bitter smile. But that wasn't all. Naturally, such a scandal couldn't be hidden. Within half an hour after the revelation, the office was abuzz with rumors. Someone had posted a video of the fight between Margot and Lauren in the corporate chat room. Someone was whispering the details, and many people just sat with their mouths open, not understanding how to continue working in such an environment. The company's management team soon gathered in an emergency meeting. Vic, pale and wrinkled, tried to explain the situation. This is a provocation. It's a fake. But everyone realized that it wasn't. Seconds of video in good quality left no doubt about the authenticity. And the main thing, the scandal occurred in front of all employees, and even with a fight between his wife and mistress. It reached the highest authorities, the head office, the founders. It was clear that the situation stinks so much that the reputation of the company must be saved. By the middle of the day, Vic was already sitting at his workplace, packing his things into a box. The decision to terminate his employment was made quickly. None of the top management wanted to cover such a disgrace. The fact that he was a promising leader, no one now remembered. He was pointed at the door. Vic's wife, Margot, was not going to forgive him either. She left the office, shouting something like, "You'll regret it." Most likely, their family was on the verge of divorce. As for Lauren, she remained sitting in some corner, trying to clean herself up after what had happened. Her hair disheveled, her clothes torn, her gaze absent. She knew everyone was pointing fingers at her now, whispering, "That's the mistress who caused all the scandal." The air was full of condemnation, contempt. Many female employees frankly looked at her with squeamishness. At the next management meeting, raised the question, who will take Vic's duties? And Nate's name suddenly popped up among the candidates. He didn't know that the discussion would happen so quickly, but the company's reaction was logical. After Vic's dismissal, there was no one left who could quickly take over project supervision. And then they remembered Nate, who had already shown himself to be a smart employee. One of the top bosses had a short conversation with Nate, asking, "Are you ready? Can you take on this role?" Nate by then had already spent hours watching the aftermath of the scandal. He realized that the company didn't want a long search for a replacement. They needed an in-house figure who knew the inner workings. And Nate was exactly the candidate Vic was hyping for the future. It's ironic. Holding a grudge against the whole company, he could have walked away, but now Nate felt like fate itself was giving him an even more subtle avenue of revenge. How could he refuse? He said yes. "Yeah, I'm ready. I'll try to lead the team out of this crisis." The management sighed with relief rather than joy. They needed someone who would keep the project afloat, who could talk to the staff, and, at the same time, to forget about the scandal as soon as possible. Nate seemed like the most appropriate person. So, by the evening of the first day of Vic's high-profile disgrace, it was officially announced that Nate was taking his place. A lightning-fast career, sparked by the colossal failure of his former boss. But while everyone was gushing about Nate's unexpected promotion, he himself could barely contain an inward smirk. "You have no idea what I'm up to next," he thought. He hadn't been an ungenerous man all his life, but the betrayal had hit too hard. And now the vigilante in him had awakened, eager to finish off those who had caused him suffering. The next day, Nate was already sitting in the spacious office that Vic had occupied before. The desk, the leather chair, the view of the skyscrapers from the window. As he ran his hand over the polished surface, he thought he could still hear the echo of Vic's voice. "This is my office, my territory." But the office had become alien and now belonged to Nate. The whole company was buzzing. How is it that yesterday's IT employee was already in the boss's chair today? Some suspected that he had insidiously set Vic up. Others thought that it was just the result of chance and Vic's mistake with sending the video. Still others dispelled rumors that Nate was supposedly friends with top managers. But no one could say anything for sure. Everything was happening too fast. Lauren, of course, tried to make contact with him. When she first appeared in the reception area of his new office, the receptionist asked perplexed, "Is your wife here to see you? Or is it ex-wife? I don't know the correct." Nate frowned. "Let her come in." Lauren came in, closed the door behind her, and stopped in the middle of the office. He noticed that she looked sad, dark circles under her eyes, tiredness on her face. She tried to smile, but it was a fake smile. "Nate," she whispered, "I wanted to apologize." He was silent, staring at her with a cold stare. A mixture of anger and satisfaction swam inside, but he didn't show it. "Look, I made a mistake." Lauren spoke, clearly struggling to find the words. "Vic, this all happened kind of out of the blue. I thought it would help you move up in the company. I went to meet with him, offered some sort of guarantee of your career advancement, and at some point the relationship went further than it should have. I got confused." She spoke while looking him in the eye. Nate listened without expression. He was disgusted, but he wanted to finish listening. "I love you. I really do," she continued, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I just wanted things to be better for us. But it's just the way things turned out. I didn't know Vic would send you the video. He promised no one would ever find out." She held out her hand, hoping Nate would take it. But he didn't make the slightest move toward her. "I can't turn back time," Lauren said, trying to hold back her sobs. "But maybe we could try to make it right. You're in charge of this department now. We can start over. I'm really sorry." Nate was silent for a long time, and then he said with a cold sneer, "Start over? After everything that's happened, do you really think I'd want anything to do with you?" Lauren perked up. "But I'm your wife," was He corrected her, crossing his arms over his chest. I've already called my lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. It sounded like a sentence. Lauren sobbed. Nate, I'm sorry. Go away, he said quietly, not raising his voice. And don't you dare talk to me about love again. She stood staring at him for a few seconds, as if she expected him to soften in some way. But Nate remained unfazed. Then Lauren covered her face with her hands and, barely containing her sobs, ran out of the office. Nate sighed heavily. He realized that emotions were raging inside him, but he couldn't show them right now. He was determined to follow the road of harsh, cold retribution to the end. A new thought was brewing in his head. She's still technically in the company, so I can make her feel the full force of the consequences. The idea of making her life a living hell didn't come out of nowhere. He was genuinely offended and humiliated. There was a resentment simmering inside, demanding to be vented. And now that he was in a leadership position, he had the tools to do just that. Once in charge, Nate began rebuilding the department, meticulously inspecting all processes. But the one he paid the most attention to was Lauren, who formerly held a modest position in the Records and Corporate Accounts division. He put her in charge of the most tedious work, processing huge archives, endless spreadsheets, reworking files, preparing unnecessary reports. And he did it in full view of everyone, so that it was clear she was not a privileged person, but an ordinary employee. No, even worse, an employee whom he was ready to fire for any little thing. Every morning he went through the reports, noting the most minor flaws, misplaced commas, incorrect footnotes, out-of-form fields. He turned every little thing into a reprimand. Lauren, he said coldly in front of his colleagues, what kind of hack work is this? Or don't you care what our documentation looks like? She blushed and whispered quiet apologies, and her colleagues looked at her. Some felt sorry for her, but no one dared to speak openly against the new boss. Nate didn't stop. He demanded more work from her, gave her assignments that were obviously incompatible with her working hours. When she didn't make it, he reprimanded her. This was repeated day after day. This isn't right, the voice in his head said. But the images from the video came back to him, and every time Nate felt a surge of cold rage, she deserved it. Lauren made several attempts to talk to him alone, but he either refused or ran into her office, which she shared with other employees, and asked in a raised tone of voice, "Why isn't the report ready yet?" Every day, she looked more and more exhausted, more depressed. She was no longer seen in the office as a well-groomed and radiant woman. She was a shadow of her former self. Nate, however, wasn't about to stop. When he drove her to the brink of a nervous breakdown, she stayed in the office late one day, trying to finish a report, and burst into tears at her computer. Several co-workers walking back down the hallway heard her sobs. They sympathized, but there was nothing they could do to help. The next day, a stone-faced Nate announced to her that she was having serious performance issues, and that if she didn't pull up immediately, he would be forced to terminate her contract. Lauren responded with pitying eyes. Please give me another chance. But Nate was adamant. Finally, when her nerves were getting the best of her, she wrote her own letter of resignation. I can't take it anymore, she whispered, bringing it into Nate's office. He didn't even look her in the eye, only said briefly, Okay, consider today your last day of work. She seemed to want to add something, to justify herself, to apologize, but he raised his hand, letting her know that the conversation was over. That was the end of Lauren's career at Solaris Technology. Nate watched her as she walked away with a stack of her belongings, head down. In that moment, he felt a strange mixture of bitterness and satisfaction. That's it, he thought. She's gotten what she deserves. And at the same time, some part of his soul questioned, what have you accomplished? Will it make you feel better that she is now banished and humiliated? But the answer was more like, I don't care anymore. The important thing is that she didn't get away with it. A few weeks after this event, the office went back to its routine. People are quick to forget other people's dramas, especially if there's work to be done and money to be made. Vic had long since disappeared from the horizon. It was said that his wife Margot had filed for divorce and was now dividing the property with him, and he himself was trying in vain to find a job in another company. But his scandalous reputation went before him. Hardly any serious executives wanted to get involved with a man whose name was associated with public videos and corporate scandal. As for Nate, he was firmly established in the role of supervisor. He developed a rapport with the rest of the staff, who realized that he was fair in his own way and could manage. The divorce between Nate and Lauren was finalized swiftly. The lawyers quickly settled the formalities. Several times Lauren tried to knock out the maximum amount of money, but in the end came out with nothing. The documents mainly prescribed the property, which was registered on Nate, and she did not have the resources to conduct a long litigation. The day her signature on the divorce papers became final, Nate simply walked out of the courthouse feeling devastated and maybe a tiny bit relieved. It's over, he thought. I'm free of her lies. I've won, he thought with quiet bitterness. Yes, in this game he had prevailed. Vic was left without a job and a family. Lauren without a husband and a career. It was ironic that everything they'd worked for in the name of easy success and a fun life had now come crashing down on them. Nate, on the other hand, stood at the top of the corporate ladder, at least within his department. Perhaps he had even more impressive prospects ahead of him. But the satisfaction came with a bitter aftertaste. Sometimes in the silence of the night, Nate would think back from start to finish and wonder, was there another way? He didn't want to go back, however, and he couldn't. The pain was too great, the resentment too deep, the thirst for payback too great. In any case, he knew one thing. Now no one would be able to laugh at him. He had proved to everyone, and to himself first and foremost, that he was not to be messed with when it came to betrayal. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.